All Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Well, hello, everybody. Get ready. Coming up next on Political Soup. After the coldest March in a long time in Nashville, we're still talking about global warming. Also, the elephants. Yes, the elephants won. We'll talk about planes, trains, and pipelines. And, of course, we'll also talk about all the fun things for teenagers to do in Chicago. That and more coming up next with Crom Carmichael on Political Soup.
Bandwidth for today's show is brought to you by SoftLayer.com. We love SoftLayer here at Talkapolis. They are the greatest hosting company ever. They make everything easy. Check out their website at SoftLayer.com. Thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Talkapolis, the social media TV network for your city.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome into this edition of Political Soup. I'm Joe Williams, along with the expert, Crom Carmichael. And Crom, we took a week or so off. I would call it an Easter break. There are others who would call it a spring break, but that's for a whole nother show,
Boy,
I think.
Very controversial, the difference between those two terms.
But welcome back. I hope you had a good time.
We did. We went down and visited my mother down in Florida for a bit, and then our daughter went to Nicaragua on a mission trip, so she came back. She came home for a weekend over Easter. That's good. So we've had a good last few weeks.
That's good. Of course, Easter coming at the end of March this year, real early Easter, and a real cold one too. At least the month of March, according to the National Weather Service here in Nashville, the coldest March in some 20 years or so.
Yes.
But we're still fighting global warming.
Well, you know what's interesting, Joe? I saw an article. I have been a skeptic of global warming. Now, I want to be sure that we're very clear on something. I divide environmental concerns into two broad categories. One is pollution, which I'm against pollution. Right. I want clean air, I want clean water. And the other is the global warming, where everybody is claiming that even our breath increases the carbon footprint and therefore will lead to the demise of the world. Yes. That's the so-called global warming part that I've been skeptical about for decades.
Okay.
And The Economist magazine, which has been one of the magazines that has been drummed, and it's a very prestigious magazine, well read all throughout Europe, and the elites in the United States read it frequently. Well, they had an editorial where they said, you know, it's interesting that in the last 15 years, the amount of carbon, now once again, this is not the pollution type thing. This is carbon, like what we breathe.
Okay.
There's been 100 billion tons of carbon have been added to the atmosphere between 2000 and 2010. So it's actually not 15 years in what they're talking about, but over 10 years. And it's saying that the temperature hasn't changed. And it can't understand. It says this creates a puzzle. Well, actually, it doesn't create a puzzle. It demonstrates that the scientific projections are false. Now, they say that there are three ways to think about this. One is that there might be a temporary lag between more carbon dioxide and rising temperatures, or the temperature rising in the 90s might have been an anomaly, or three, the climate is responding to higher CO2 levels in ways that scientists don't understand.
You think?
Well, there you go. It has to be, by definition, it has to be the third.
Do they understand the number? What was it, 100 billion?
100 billion.
Tons.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's 100 billion tons of CO2, which is what we exhale.
Sure.
Now, the world recycles CO2.
Yeah.
Now, and we're not talking about dirty air. We're talking about CO2. And so what you have is you've got the environmentalists now are all up in a dither. Now, in a related subject, you have two other little stories here that I kind of happened across. One is on the wind subsidies, and this is a perfect example of why Obama's subsidies and cronyism is such a bad idea. What's happened is in 2009, and by the way, this is not an attack on Barack Obama alone. Republicans were part of this. This is cronyism at its worst, and the cronies in this case are the wind power companies that go to the federal government that have been getting great big subsidies.
Oh, yes.
30% of the cost of building a wind farm is paid for by you and me and the other taxpayers.
Right.
We derive zero benefit zero benefit, and here's why. The cost of producing the cost of a megawatt hour prior to the subsidy was $37. The cost now is $54. Now, if you look at what's the difference between 54 and 37 as a percentage,
yes,
it's 30%.
Really?
Yeah. And so what the taxpayers are doing is it is paying wind farm operators to be inefficient. It is paying them to be inefficient. So the tax credit is being recycled into the pockets of those who are closest to the politicians, which is why, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, you ought to be against government subsidies, period. So that's what we learned from that. Now, the other little story that's related to that that's interesting is the story about the tale of two oil spills.
Yes.
You've got two types of ways of transporting oil from the field to a refinery. One is by train, and one is by pipeline.
Right.
Now, historically, pipelines have been much safer in moving oil from the field to a refinery.
Probably always will be.
But when there is a crack or a break in an oil pipeline
Right.
and there's a spill, that becomes news. When a train has one, it's not news. And that's what's interesting here. Now, as I read through the story, I found out in here that it turns out that Warren Buffett, one of the people who is most praised by the left, because you see he's for higher taxes
Right.
on everybody except himself. Okay, he's the richest man in the country, but the way he handles his affairs, he won't be affected by higher tax rates. But turns out that Berkshire Hathaway owns, guess what?
Railroads.
Railroads. And so they've seen their traffic hauling oil rise dramatically, even though hauling oil by train is a lot worse for the environment than moving it by pipeline.
It's a higher risk. It's it's more costly, and yeah, you're burning carbon fuels, fossil fuels to make it move.
Sure, yeah, a lot more than doing it through a pipeline. So there's nothing that says that hauling by train is better, except that Warren Buffett gets to put a lot of money in his pocket.
Well, the other half to that is if you look at the Surface Transportation Board controls railroads, and they are an entirely different animal.
Okay.
Entirely separate. They're not regulated by EPA, DOT, or any of this. It's almost a category unto themselves. The wind farm, the last time we were here, we were talking about wind farms and eagles getting in and being killed, and that's not a big deal because that's
400,000 birds a year are killed by wind farms, and the Audubon Society and PETA more or less just look the other way.
But the wind farms get a break. I mean, they're kind of an animal unto themselves with that. Same way with railroads. They are an animal unto themselves under the board and can do almost anything they want to.
Okay, well,
and that starts to explain why. Yeah.
So at any rate, I just thought that when we talk about global warming, we talk about regulations and whatnot. I think it's important to know the facts, to understand what they mean, and then to try to figure out, okay, what needs to be done. And the solution is not better subsidies. No. The solution is no subsidies.
Now, we brought up the birds, and you rang the bell. You said the magic word, PETA. Our friends at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Of course, we had a long discussion with Mike.
Well, the Audubon Society looks the other way when wind farms kill birds.
Right.
Okay, and the Audubon Society is supposed to be trying to protect birds, especially eagles.
Right.
Okay. Now, if a farmer happens to kill an eagle, that can be criminal. That is civil. All these different things. But wind farms can actually get a permit to kill eagles. Now, PETA, as we talked about the other day, kills dogs and cats as a matter of policy.
At an alarming rate.
At over 90%.
Right.
Okay, so that's PETA. The People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals kill them.
But there are other groups.
That's right. There are others, and this is a great story. The company that owns the Barnum and Bailey Circus was sued about 10 years ago.
I remember that, actually.
Okay, was sued because the claim was that they mistreat animals, specifically elephants.
Right.
Well, a judge has recently ruled that those organizations that sued the company that owns the Barnum and Bailey Circus must pay the legal fees for the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and they total over $20 million.
That's going to hurt. But
that's going to hurt.
As I recall, they had a whistleblower that had all the goods.
That's right. these groups. And let's see here. One of them settled, and this is for the American. Now this is a big one. The American Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Mm-hmm. We've heard of them. They ended up paying $9.3 million. They settled. They wanted to get out. They settled and they paid 9.3. Then these other groups that are in here, one is Fund for Animals, and the other is the Animal Welfare Institute. It's possible that those two may end up just going broke then reconstituting themselves under another name to avoid having to pay the claims.
Sure.
But they had a whistleblower, and that was their star witness. Well, it turns out that this star witness had been written up before he was fired. He'd been written up for being drunk. Uh-oh. He had been written up for being abusive to the animals, and he had been written up for being absent and tardy at work on numerous occasions.
Wait a minute, he was whistleblowing on himself.
Well, more or less. So when he was put up on the witness stand, he was completely and utterly discredited, which is part of the reasoning for the judge, is that if you don't have any facts to support your case, just because you think you can sue a big company and get them to settle, in this case they were wrong. And so kudos to the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, for standing up for themselves in court. And I hope the judge chases these people down, and maybe even the boards of directors of these two companies if they try to file for bankruptcy, and see if they might be able to extract a little money, because they do that in the private sector now.
Yeah, you know what really amazed me about that story, and I do remember when that case was filed, and I remember thinking to myself, why would the circus with the elephants being probably the single biggest trademark, if you will,
sure,
of the Barnum and Bailey circus. Why would you abuse the golden goose?
Well, they didn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it didn't make any sense then. It doesn't make any sense now.
But I mean, so anyway, it's the lions, it's the tigers. They do a great job, and plus they provide wonderful entertainment for families. And so anyway, good story here to see another so-called, and I say so-called, animal rights group get their butt handed to them.
I think he enjoyed that.
Yes,
Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! More to come when we return to Political Soup. Stay with us.